Derek doing PM
Oh yeah, Derek.
work?
My bad, Derek.
Bro, come on, bro. We literally had to talk about this
You're
earlier today.
underselling him.
Derek, my
Wait,
bad.
Derek, you're not going for Sweet?
Maybe I'll try, but like I'm not. Much rather do product over Sweet.
I see.
You said I sweet. All right.
Nice to meet you. All right, go ahead.
All right. Cool. I'm screen sharing, right?
Yeah, and you're recording.
Awesome. Well, you guys know that I have been writing down a lot of different resources and stuff in the Notion inside of like members internal how-to job recruiting. And pretty much I haven't filled out everything, but a lot of things that are here will be very useful, like cover letters and resumes and whatnot. But let's just go ahead and talk about the different sorts of questions and the different things that you need to prepare when you're entering into like a software engineering, a design, or product management interview. So since everyone here is software engineering, let's just go ahead and start off here. So I have this super legal version of Cracking the Coding interview here. If you don't have it already, you can download it as a PDF. I'm sure a lot of you already have it. But there are four main types of questions. The first is going to be behaviorals. Those are really going to test your experience, your communication skills, and the things that you've done in the past. We'll go a little bit more in depth into that. They're going to be asking you like more technical coding questions. These are super, super famous. Obviously, you guys all know about them. They're the ones that you prepare for on LeetCode and HackerRank, and that you can get a lot of practice from just obviously doing the questions, but then also reading and cracking the coding interview. You'll have system design questions, which are more practical technology questions. Those will ask you, hey, if we want to make like a marketplace application, how would we go about doing that? Or if I wanted to create a tiny URL clone, how would I go about making that system? Or if I wanted to recreate Dropbox's file system, how would I go about doing that? And then the last type of question is a curveball question. So a curveball question is also known as a stress test question. And essentially, they're asking you something that they know you don't know the answer to, but they want to see how you react to pressure and how you react to figuring something out that you don't know. And so an example of this, the classic example, is how many golf balls fit inside of a plane, right? So those are all the questions for software engineering that you need to prepare for. Then we can go ahead and talk about design. So design is going to be a little bit different. You always start off with the behaviorals, always the same behaviorals. Then usually you'll have a portfolio review. So portfolio review is obviously like designers will have done a whole bunch of different stuff and they've worked on a whole bunch of different projects, and they'll have to be able to speak and walk someone through the design process and the user experience ideation for every single one of their projects. And it's essentially just like walking through the portfolio or walking through the resume and just being able to strongly support every single idea and every single decision that you made. Then you'll have product design questions. These questions are also faced by PMs. And what these are is they want to test that you actually have an opinion on how to make things better and you know how to design good products. So they'll ask you questions like, hey, what's your favorite application? And you'll say it and then you'll ask them why. Like, why is that your favorite application? Tell me why it's a well-designed application. Or they'll tell you, hey, tell me how to improve your favorite application. And most of the times, you need to do your research on the specific software or application that your company owns. And you'll want to know it very, very well and come in with ideas from the get-go where you have ideas on how to improve their product. So for example, if you're interviewing with Spotify and you're a designer, they're 100% going to ask you, hey, what is a feature that you would make to make Spotify better? Or how would you make Spotify better? And you better be able to come up with something really good, which you will prepare for beforehand. And then they'll also ask you questions like, okay, if we were to design an alarm clock for the blind, how would you go about doing that? And there's a special framework that we can go through on how to answer those questions. But yeah, those are product design questions. And then lastly, once again, they'll ask you curveball questions. They're a lot less likely to ask a designer curveball questions because that's just not the culture. Usually they'll ask curveball questions to engineers and product managers. For product management, they ask the 4 same questions again. It's behaviorals. Sometimes they'll ask technical or system design questions. It depends on how technical the company is, like what that product culture is like, and then also your technical background. So if you are a designer or a business person going into PM, they're probably going to be a little bit more lenient on the technical or system design questions, but it is more rare in general. They will ask you the product design questions. As a product manager, you have to be able to have opinions on products. You have to have an idea of how to improve them. And this is super, super important. Like this is probably like one of the most important questions. And it's like the hardest part of a PM interview. Usually these product design question sessions, like one question could probably take like 30, 40 minutes. So it takes quite a while to go through. It's a lot like a case interview, if you've ever done a case interview for consulting. And then lastly is curveballs, once again. So let's go ahead and start off with behaviorals and how to answer them and go about doing them. Are a lot of you guys familiar with behaviorals? I know the business kids are probably pretty familiar with behaviorals, but
Never heard of her.
What are these behavioral questions?
Okay.
Yo, do you behave? Like they're like, oh, behave, and just behave for them.
Y'all are absolutely clowns. Okay. Well, I will just pretend like you guys don't know anything about behaviorals, even though you probably do. So behaviorals are really, really important. They're usually asked at the beginning of an interview, sort of just to like warm you up before you get down deep in the dirty with like your technical system design, HackerRank type or product design questions. And they're really just to gauge your interest and your experiences and how well you communicate. And they're super, super important because your behaviors are going to be what sets off the tone for the rest of your interview. And most of the time, I'd say 90% of the questions that they ask you, they're going to be right out of the book. Like they're just going to be the common behavioral questions. And this should be easy money for you. Like if you don't prepare for these behaviorals and if you don't have your answers nailed down beforehand, then you're just at an inherent disadvantage because you don't know what product design question they're going to give you. You don't know what coding question they're going to give you, but you sure as heck know what behaviorals they're going to ask you. So if anything, this is a great way to stand out from every other engineer or every other designer or every other product manager, because if you can communicate better than your average, like you're going to be able to communicate way better than your average Google or Facebook or whatever suite, because they have no communication skills. So if you can just have that edge, it's a really big difference. One thing that you need to have down is your elevator pitch. So they're always going to ask you, tell me about yourself. And you need to have a 30-second version of this, a minute version of this, and a minute and a half version of this. And during your elevator pitch, you need to pitch yourself. You need to talk about yourself and give a very, very brief highlight of all the different things that you do. And it's essentially just your experience and your background. So my elevator pitch is, hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm a student at UT Austin studying business, biology, computer science, and management information systems. And I have, a deep experience in healthcare technology. I've worked at Dell Medical School developing different applications with the chief technology officer. And I've worked all the way from medical robotics to Y Combinator startups, where I was a full stack engineer on a 7-person team. I realized pretty early on in my software engineering career that I was actually way more suited to product management because I love talking to people and I love understanding the why and the how behind solving different problems. That led me to my experience at Roblox, where I was a product management intern and helped increase user engagement by 5 million minutes per day. And I also, in my spare time, like to build different applications. And I'm very entrepreneurial. I built Spotify Buddy, which allows people to listen to music with each other from wherever they are. And I also built a meal swipe marketplace that served, over 800 meals to UT students. Like that's an elevator pitch right there. And you need to have that in your back pocket because they will always ask you to tell them about yourself. So major key. And if you want to have an example, so if you go under design and then also Adri, I made her write out her tell me about yourself elevator pitch. My name is Adri Torres, sophomore advertising student at UT Austin. This is the career that I'm pursuing. I'm especially interested in this. These are my experiences. This is a highlight of something that I've done. You know, I created an organization. I taught students stuff. I worked out as a graphic design director. And yeah, super, super helpful. Something that I would recommend is go ahead and clone this Notion page into your own personal Notion workspace. And if you go into all of these links that I sent you, you'll have a lot of questions. And if you have the time, I would say copy and paste some of these questions, and maybe you don't have to write out exactly the answer to every single one of these questions, but at least think about how you would answer them. Think about how you would answer these behavioral questions. Like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking maybe like for like future like people within TPO, once they get an interview, like they can just write down the questions they had, like in a database.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Be solid. We can definitely make that. So yeah, they'll always ask you the elevator pitch. So prepare that. They'll ask you your greatest strengths and your greatest weaknesses. Usually they won't ask you 3, but they'll usually ask you 1. And if you answer that super confidently and the interviewer is just trying to be a jerk and is just trying to test you, they'll ask you more. So one time I was in an interview and I told them my greatest weakness. And then the guy was like, okay, tell me another one. And so I told him another greatest weakness. And he's like, okay, tell me another one. And I told him another one. And if they keep pressing you, that's just a stress test. So after a while, like I'd say 3 is a good cutoff. After you do 3, be like, well, you know what? I honestly don't think that there are many other really great weaknesses that I have. These are the main ones to cover. And it shows that you have like a backbone and that you're assertive to say no. Cool. They're also going to always ask you why you want that specific job, and why you are the best fit over other candidates for that specific job. Like, no, you should not even have to think about this for a second. Like, as soon as you go in, like, even if it's not true, you should have an answer as to why you want this job and why you're more fit to this job than everyone else. Like for example, when I went to go interview for Roblox, I was like, Roblox is connecting. Like, first of all, I read their mission and I read like their statement and everything. I said, Roblox is connecting the world through play. They're helping so many kids, and people just have great experiences and great online experiences. And I cited playing with my cousin and how that was so much fun, and how he loved Roblox, and how I wanted to, you know, power those experiences for other people. And then at the end, they will always ask, do you have any questions for me? And this is the time to show that you really did your research on the company. Like, ask them hard questions. Ask them questions that show that you actually think about and you know about the company. Because a lot of SWEs will be like, no, I don't have any questions for you. And that's just bad. Like, you should have questions if you're interested in a job. And then another one.
Just ask like, oh, what's the expected salary for this position?
Oh, don't ask that question. Please don't ask.
That's a hard question.
Dude, do not ask that question. Ask questions like, you know, like, what has your experience been like? How would you describe your company culture? Is it like a top-down or bottom-up type thing? Be like, if you had a daughter, would you want your daughter to work at this company? Like, those sorts of questions that show that you're really thinking. And then the last one, these are pretty much questions that will literally be asked in every interview. It's like, what would your friends say about you? Besides that, like, behavioral questions can range into a whole bunch of different types, but usually they fall into just a few buckets. So they'll fall into teamwork. They'll be like, oh, tell us about a time that you worked on a team. We'll talk about leadership. Like, what is a time that you have stepped up as a leader? Let's see, what friends? Hurts, bro. Yeah, we'll talk about leadership. Like, what's a time that you stepped up as a leader? We'll talk about conflict. So when is a time that you either resolved a conflict well, and how did you deal with that? They'll ask you about a time you failed, a time that you've you know, made a personal impact, and then maybe a time of success if they really want to give you an easy question. So my strategy in this is that I will usually take something off of my resume that I think was super impressive, and I will write that down as a story that I want to use during a behavioral interview. And then what I'll do is I'll put all the different buckets on one axis and then all my stories that I want to use on another axis. And I will make sure that I'm able to answer a teamwork question, a leadership question, a conflict question, time of success, time of failure, all with that story. So I'll come up with different ways to mold and shape that story to answer those specific bucket behavioral questions. And so that's one way to do it. And the other way you can do it is you can simply just write down all the different buckets, and then you can write down a different example for each one of those buckets. And you can write in like the ones that fit there. So I highly, highly, highly recommend making a matrix with a different type of behavioral questions, with different examples from your resume that you can use to answer those questions really well. And then practice and be able to like know that matrix from the back of your head. So if you ask me a teamwork question, what am I going to say? Well, my teamwork answer is going to be TPEO. Like that's my teamwork answer.
Wait, Ron.
What's up?
So you use one story to be able to answer like a variety of those, like teamwork, leadership, and solving a conflict, or do you think like it would be like, or is it okay if you have like different stories for each one? I feel like that's too much, right?
No. So you should definitely have different stories for each one, because they're not going to ask you 10 behavioral questions. They're usually just going to ask you like 4 or 5. And by then all of your stories will have been used up. Like you don't want to repeat the same story twice, because you want to use this time to show as much breadth of your experience as possible. So the reason why you want to have multiple examples for every single bucket is because if they ask me a leadership question and I use my TPEO answer, then I don't want to use TPEO as an example again, unless I'm just really, I just don't have anything else to talk about. And I think that I can truly add some more value by talking about a different experience I had with TPEO, right? But the reason why you would have multiple examples is because if I use TPEO for leadership, I want to make sure that I have a backup plan for a teamwork question and that it's not just TPEO as well. Like, oh, instead I'm going to talk about my time at a startup, that kind of.
Okay, cool.
But I think in general, the hardest questions to answer are the conflict questions. The conflict questions and the time you failed questions. Because even though you need to talk about a time you failed, you can't just be like, oh, I deleted the entire database for the startup and then it died. Like you have to wrap it up and you have to say, but I learned that you should always back up your data, and I was able to implement a backup system for the startup and successfully recover our data, like blah, 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 right? You need to wrap it up, and it always has to have a happy ending. Like don't just talk about a time that you had a conflict and be like, yeah, I had this really big fight with a team member and then we never talked again. Like, don't say that. It's just a bad move. Cool. And then a method that I think is really, really good to answer these behavioral questions is the STAR method. If you haven't heard of it before, it's super, super simple. You have STAR, which is an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, and result. So the situation gives the context of the story that you're about to tell. The task is whatever problem that you had to like solve or face. The action is what you did to solve that task or problem. And then the result is what got yielded out of that. So for example, situation, there were no campuses there were no organizations on campus that were teaching people how to build practical tech software. Task, it was really hard to like get a group of people together who had the knowledge already to teach people how to build software in different disciplines. Action, I went and I talked to as many people as I could who had really great experience, and I formed a team. As a result, we accepted 20 amazing fellows who have worked on awesome projects throughout the Austin community and have had a great impact on them by allowing them to learn those technical skills and then get them internships. Like situation, task, action, results. and make sure that it's answering the question that they asked. Cool. Does anyone have any questions over behaviorals? This is really, really important. And you need to, especially before you go into any interview, have these questions down and have your stories and know how your stories can answer the big bucket questions. Anyone have any questions over this stuff? Nope. Okay, cool. You guys should practice this. Really important. Let's see. The other types of questions that we have are, we have those product design questions. We have the system design questions. We have those technical questions. And then we also have the curveball questions. So I'll just go over like a quick overview of like technical questions and system design questions. I'm definitely not an expert by any means with like LeetCoding or HackerRanks, even though I've like definitely passed my fair share in the past. But I would just highly recommend reading Cracking the Coding Interview. It's like the best book by far, after talking to a lot of people, for preparing for these questions. And I'm sure you guys know this already, but grind Cracking the Coding Interview, really understand how these questions work and how to solve them, and then LeetCode and HackerRank away, right? That's it for software engineers. In terms of PMs for doing this, you really don't have to, you don't have to do this. It's like probably the lowest thing on the list in terms of studying for PM interviews. And the only questions that really grind on technicals and really want to make sure that you know what's going on for a coding interview are going to be Google. They're going to be Google, and then also, oh shoot, another one that I think is like kind of irrelevant because I'm just not thinking about it right now. But Google really cares. And then, oh, Salesforce. Salesforce will sometimes ask technical questions as well. And then for Roblox, I had to take a HackerRank, but it wasn't like the worst thing in the world. In terms of system design questions, I would highly recommend watching different YouTube videos on system design. So there's this one dude who's like really good. He's like this brown guy. Oh, Gaurav Sen. Oh, this guy's such a beast. He has such good system design question.
Writing's not that easy.
So I will go ahead and like
Grammarly can help
right here. But he has some really awesome stuff on system design, like load balancing, like how Tinder can be created through microservices and stuff like that. So I highly recommend this guy. And you can find a lot of like system design questions and answers online as well. But yeah, just grind Cracking the Coding Interview and LeetCode. Pretty much it. Something that I'm a little bit more familiar with is the product design questions. So we can talk a little bit about the product design questions and actually run through a few if you want. Let's see. Sorry, I'm at my aunt's house and they're cooking food right now. So we can look into this. I have some product slides for system design. Let's see. Cool. So these are product design questions. They'll usually ask you, have you ever used our company's products? Choose one and tell me how to improve it. Tell me about a product you use frequently and why you enjoy using it. Design a health feature for Facebook. Design a pen for an astronaut. Yada, yada, yada. They all have the same sentiment. Tell me why something's good. Or if it's not good, tell me how to make it better. And there is a pretty easy framework in answering these questions. And the number one thing is, first, you want to understand who you're designing for. Like that's absolutely the most important aspect and thing that you need to take away from like product design questions, it's like, who am I designing this for? What am I creating? Like, who am I creating this for? And you need to focus it around all of those stakeholders and make sure that everything that you're saying and every single decision you're making is tying back to the users or the stakeholders. And this isn't always just going to be one stakeholder. So for example, if I was asking you, like, how would I design a pen for an astronaut? Like, obviously the stakeholders are going to be the astronauts, but you know, what about the people? Like, what are the astronauts using the pen to write for? Like, who are they writing letters to? Like, what are the use cases? Yada, yada, yada. And for business design questions, it's more than just the user. You have to think about the user. You have to think about the technical team that's going to be building that feature. You need to be thinking about whether or not that feature is going to make people money. You need to think about like all those different things, especially in product interviews. For user experience, user interface interviews, they're usually not going to ask you questions about, or you usually don't have to go into scope about like if it's going to make, you know, the company money or not. But as a product manager, you definitely want to go into like, is this business feasible? Is this tech feasible? And is this good for the users? For designers, if you have an engineering background, you can talk about whether it's tech feasible, but usually you're just going to be thinking about user experience. So yeah, the steps in answering a product design question, there are a lot of different ways to go about it, but this is a very simple structure on how to answer them. So number one, ask clarifying questions. So if I were asked the question, design a health feature for Facebook, I would say, who are we designing the health feature for? Like, what is the goal of designing this health feature? Is it to increase user engagement of our existing Facebook users? Are we trying to capture or enter a specific target market? Are we trying to grow into a new market? Are we trying to make money? Like, what is the goal? And then based on that goal and based on the users, then I will just say, hey, all right, so if we are designing a new Facebook health feature for senior citizens and our goal is to increase their engagement on the platform in the United States, then first what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the different use cases for senior citizens in the United States and the different health problems that they might want to be solved. I'll identify the current products that are offering them services in the market, and I'll identify their gaps and where Facebook can step in. I'll think about some different features and some improvements that we could make. I will identify the trade-offs and prioritize the features, the different features that we can come up with. And then lastly, I will, you know, make a recommendation based on this analysis, what we should do and what we should implement, you know, to add healthcare features to Facebook. And yeah, so like right here, ask the target market, ask who you're designing for, ask just like what the overall goal is. Are we trying to make the company money? Are we trying to have bottom line growth with money or top line growth with user growth? Are we trying to engage our current users more? Are we trying to just get more people? You always want to communicate in an outline. You want to be a consultant in communicating everything in bullet points. Like, I will talk about 3 things, X, Y, Z, and then go down the list X, Y, Z, and then give them a summary at the end, because it just shows that you have a cohesive thought process and that also you're able to, you know, be clear when you communicate. Identifying the users and customers is always, you know, really fun and important. Just identify all the different things that could be solved by this particular feature, and then see, like, talk about what companies or products are currently doing this. Think about improvements and features. Usually, and it depends on how much time you have, but you could, when you're doing this, you need to have a piece of paper where you're writing down all your ideas and organizing your thoughts. You just want to think about anything that you possibly can that makes sense. And then number 6, you'll say, hey, I think these things are most important to make, and then summarize that recommendation, tying it back to the user. Do you guys want to try this out and do a question? What I do with the product fellows usually is I'll ask them a question, and then you'll answer one of these steps. or to whatever point you're comfortable, and then you'll popcorn someone else to continue on with the answer. We can do this, or we can, I guess we can like also look at curveball questions as well. But I think I've like given a pretty good overview of everything that you need to prepare for in an interview. Does anyone have any like specific questions, or do you guys want to go through this product design question? Bro, come on. Do y'all want to go through
We
this?
we can do product design. I'm down.
Saran, Yash, Jeffrey, Amanda, do you guys just want me to talk about my own experiences interviewing? Like, I can do that too.
I think that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, then go to like curveball questions. I mean, I don't have much time. I'm not sure how long these product questions will be, because as you said, it takes quite a bit of time, right?
Mhm.
That was one consideration I was thinking about.
Yeah, they definitely do take a bit of time. I can show you, well, I guess I can just talk about all the different interview experiences I've had.
Wait, Jonathan, I have a question.
Mhm.
So did you have PM experience before Roblox?
No.
Did they ever like, cause like Roblox is like a pretty big company, right? Wouldn't they expect some sort of previous experience?
That's like the paradox, right?
So
Like, how do you get experience before experience?
No, but like startups would be like more lenient towards it, but
yeah, so I think something, and this may be more specific towards PM, it's a meme in the industry that to get a PM job, you have to have PM experience, like for entry-level PM jobs. And everyone always memes about that. And so I think something that you need to have, a really strong one coming in, is why PM. They will always ask you why PM, why this company, or like why the role that you're applying for. And I would say none of the people in my Roblox class had PM experience from a actual company, except one of the dudes who was like a Google PM, like TPM. But they're not, like, these companies that are giving out internships, they understand that you're not going to have like PM experience at somewhere else. It's a plus for sure, but they just want to know specifically for PM that you're good at communicating, that you understand how to talk to engineers and designers, and that you want to do PM and you understand what it is. So I wouldn't stress too hard. Well, I wouldn't stress too hard about having like PM experience before you apply for a PM internship, because at the end of the day, an internship is supposed to teach you about those things. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I can show you guys some of the stuff that I did for different interviews. Like, for example, a lot of companies will have you do a challenge, especially if you're recruiting PM or design. They'll have you do like a product or design challenge before you go into the interview, and during that interview you'll present whatever you came up with. So I think if we go into Google Drive and I log into my personal Google Drive and then we search Duolingo, we should be able to, here it is. So they sent me a candidate exercise and they said, find a KPI, which is just a metric that you use to measure success for a feature that would improve the KPI. The document should be no longer than 5 slides, and it should communicate enough information that the design and engineering team would know how to get started. So yeah, it says, once the changes are developed and released to our users, how would you A/B test it? What user actions or metrics would you keep an eye on? And then it says, keep your tasks confidential, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. Cool. So I made this slide deck, and my idea was simulated in real life conversations. Essentially, one of the biggest pitfalls of Duolingo is that a lot of people complain that it doesn't help you in terms of actually speaking in conversations. It helps you with vocabulary and grammar, but the most important part of learning a language is speaking. And that was my thesis for this. Dude, the director of PM hated this presentation, by the way. Not because of the presentation, but because I'm pretty sure that they had tried to implement a feature similar to this before internally, and they were just like, it was so bad. As soon as I brought up that I wanted to like add conversations to the platform, they were like, that's a, like the director of PM was like, that was a terrible, like, that's a bad idea. We don't think that that should happen. And he was like low key a butt. But it's okay. We can just go through it. So I presented just like different goals and then how we would measure those goals and how it tied back to our mission statement. I made a UI mock-up of what the conversations feature would look like. I would say, I mean, this was bad. Like I said, we could A/B test for placement, but honestly, I knew nothing about metrics at the time when I was giving this talk or giving this presentation. And then I talked about the features, how we could do simulated conversations, how we could do a language exchange potentially with like people in different places, and how you could use your native language experience to teach someone else your native language. And I talked about how there are like a lot of different apps that currently do this and how they're like successful, and how like this was like a really big problem, yada, 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 validate hypothesis, A/B test and stuff. And then here's how you measure success. So that's just like an example of a product question, I guess. Do you guys want to like go over curveball questions? Maybe?
Oh,
Questions?
before that, Jonathan, that was a great example. Did you come with the idea first, or did you kind of do your research in and then come to that conclusion for that idea?
Yeah, I mean,
for the like, conversations for Duolingo.
I definitely did my research. I was like, what's like one of the biggest issues and problems that we could solve? And like that was just a huge issue in the forums. And it's something that I noticed myself after using the app. Oh, something I'd also really highly plug is before you go into an interview, just do as much research as you can about the company and their product. I know like before I got my interview for Roblox, I grinded playing Roblox with my little cousin, which isn't really research, but I also listened to a lot of podcasts where the CEO is talking about his vision and all this stuff, and just read up on the company's mission, their values, their vision, and make sure that whatever you're portraying to the company, it matches along almost perfectly with that. Like whatever Kool-Aid they're feeding the internet, like for example, I don't know if you guys have heard the phrase like drinking Kool-Aid, but when you work at a company, all that company is going to tell you is how great and amazing that company is, because they want to brainwash you. Yeah, I mean, that's just how it is, right? So like if you are already brainwashed and you can convince the recruiter that you're already hopped onto their mission and that you're already drinking their Kool-Aid, they'll love that. So just something to think about.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you guys want to do practice questions? Like, do you want me to ask you guys questions and we can critique how you're answering them and stuff? No?
Let's go to curveball first.
Curveball?
Let's go over all the questions and then we can do some practice perhaps, right?
Sure. Okay. So a curveball question. Here. I don't know if I have slides over this. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't.
Like, is it like a kind of a good tip for these questions, like not to overanalyze? If they're asking you like, a technical question, like how many marbles can fit in an airplane, you're not gonna like overthink it, right?
Okay, so these are also called estimation questions. And they will test you on, it essentially tests you on how you think, whether you can think logically, even if it's not the right answer. And they'll also test you on just like handling pressure and then like mental math, because a lot of it is mental math. So these aren't really, like some curveball questions, they'll be like, what's your favorite animal? Or no, not what's your favorite animal. I think one example of a curveball question that we gave you guys in the TPO interview was, what's the largest mammal that you think you could like easily beat in a fight, like confidently beat in a fight? Like, that's a curveball question. You know, we asked a lot of more serious behavioral questions, but it's a time where you can show your personality and you can show that like, hey, you're more than just this software engineer doing this. Like most of you guys should be fine with these curveballs, but
dude, I could definitely beat a whale. Like the whale would just suffocate, so it's cool.
Yeah.
Remove the water. Yeah.
I guess there are like two types of curveball questions. One are the more qualitative ones. Let's just ask you something far out. Like, what's something that you hate about this company? Or like, I don't know. And they just, it's like a question that you have to walk on eggshells for. But in general, like those questions, I'm pretty confident that you guys can answer any question that a recruiter throws at you that's just like totally out there. It's just going to be on the same type vibe as what's the largest animal that you can confidently beat in a fight. But then the other type of question is like an estimation type question. So answering estimation interview questions. And I can go ahead and paste this into here. Usually these product estimation questions are going to be asked to product managers, but they can also be asked to engineers, and then rarely they will be asked to designers. Let me go ahead and try to paste this into here somewhere, and then I can organize this later. But I actually, hold up. I think I have a, sorry. Yeah, I think I actually wrote down like how to solve these questions, but you start off with like clarifying questions. So let's start with an easier one than just the golf balls inside of an airplane. I think an easier one would be, how many coffee shops are there in Austin, Texas? Or a slightly harder variation of that would be, how many cups of coffee are sold in Austin, Texas every day? Right? So the way you start off with that is you want to start asking clarifying questions to make it easy for yourself. So if someone were to ask me, how many cups of coffee were sold in Austin every single day? I would say, are we talking about all cups of coffee, including like K-cups that people make at their own homes? Are we talking about like just Starbucks type coffee places where they're selling coffee by the cup? Are we talking about like wholesale retailers, like for example, like selling large coffee bags in Austin? And then they'll clarify it a little bit. If they're nice, which they probably will be because they're asking you a hard question, they'll say something like, oh, we're just talking about selling cups of coffee. We're not talking about making cups of coffee at home, just like your average Starbucks or regular cafe, right? And so then I would write down, okay, just talking about cups of coffee from stores, not home bought coffee. And then with that information that they just gave me, I would write down an assumption. And an assumption is, and I mean, you're just pulling this out of your ass, right? But you say, I would say that 50% of consumers, or maybe that's lower, like 40% of consumers make their own coffee in the morning, and they're not going out to these coffee stores to buy them because it's too expensive. And a lot of coffee consumers are consuming this every day on the weekday to help them go through work, right? So I'm gonna write down 50% of the total market. And really the goal with these estimation questions is breaking the problem down into smaller pieces and using either population or some other baseline metric or number that I can come up with out of my ass to find out the answer. So I will then write down an assumption like, okay, if we're talking about the market of Austin, Texas, there are roughly 1 million people that live in Austin, Texas. And 50% of those people are, like 50% of the coffee consumers are going to, be buying rather than making it at home. And then you can go in even deeper detail. So I will then say something like, all right, now let's go ahead and segment the population of Austin by age buckets. So I will assume that the age population is evenly distributed from 0 to 80 years of age. So I'll make a bucket for 0 to 10. and 10 to 20, and 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 60, 70, 70, 80. And you can make those buckets however large you want. I would probably say 0 to 10 is a bucket, and a very low percentage of these people are going to be consuming coffee, right? And then I'll say 10 to 20, like it'll be, you know, a slightly higher percentage because a lot of teens might drink coffee, but the highest percentage is going to be 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, whatever. And I'll write down those different age segments, and I'll say, this percent I think consumes coffee, this percent, blah, 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 blah. I will segment down those things. I'll do the mental math. I'll add it together. Then I'll say, okay, these are the number of people in Austin who I think drink coffee. And this is the percentage of them that go out and buy cups of coffee. And you like multiply that by 50%, so you half that. And then on average, like 5 out of 7 days of the week, like people are probably going to be going out to getting coffee. So I would say like 5 out of 7, do that math there. And then from there, I would just present them the answer. Like, okay, on average, like 5 out of 7 days, these are all the people that are buying it. And I'll present them the answer. And that answer is going to be way off. But what you can do is you can fact check, or not fact check, you can sanity check. So you'll come up with a number, and then if that number seems reasonable, you'll say, this is the number that I came up with, and they'll have seen your entire thought process of going through that. And it doesn't matter what the answer is. It doesn't matter how far away it is. All that matters is that you went through this entire process and showed them that you can think logically and use estimations and approximations to find something. It's the same thing with the plane, right? With the plane, you want to break down the plane into chunks and parts that you can estimate. So for the plane, I would be like, are we including the chairs in there? Are we including the baggage compartments? Are we including the cockpit? Are we including the jet fuel tank? All these different things. And then based on that, I'll make a list of all the different parts of the plane, right? I'll say, there are this many seats, there are this many baggage compartments, there are this many that. I'll come up with an individual volume for golf balls for all of these different parts of the plane, and then I'll add them together and then do the math. Yeah, and also during this, you always want to give yourself easy round numbers. Does that make sense? Did I answer that well? Y'all understand?
Perfect.
Cool. That's pretty much it. Those are all the questions. I think that's like a pretty good overview of all the questions that are going to be asked. And yeah, just as soon as you get an interview, like start grinding for this. I mean, start grinding for it now, because there are going to be lulls in terms of, you know, when you're sending out applications and when you hear back. And during those lulls, you should be practicing your behaviorals, your technicals, your product design questions, and being able to talk confidently about all the different things that you've done on your resume. And something that we want to do is, if you guys are interested, we want to host mock interviews between different people. So once a week, you'll be matched with a new buddy in TPEO who's also interviewing for that role. You'll get mock interviewed by someone, and yeah, you'll be able to practice like behaviorals, technicals, product design questions. So if you guys are interested, I'm going to send out a Google form after this, and just fill it out, and it'll be good because we'll all be able to practice and we'll all be able to have an edge when it comes to recruiting. So just make sure that you guys start prepping now, because recruiting is going to come by really, really quick. Cool. Do you guys have any other questions for me in what I talked about, like literally over anything, because I've probably done the most interviews out of us, hopefully. No?
Sounds good.
Sounds good? Cool. Well, I'm going to send the form in all members, and just let me know if you guys need anything. Obviously, I'm always available on Slack. Or not always, but just message me. Sound good? Sounds good. All right, y'all. Peace.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.